An old Santa Claus finds a baby in a trash bin, unaware that the baby's mother is a famous singer.
Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
The church bell rang, reverberating through the stillness of a cold Christmas Eve night. Gabriel Sanders, an old man with snow-white hair, trudged along the empty street. The worn-out Santa Claus outfit draped over his frail frame offered little protection against the biting cold. In his hands, he clutched a small bag of gifts, his last offerings for the underprivileged children of the neighborhood. "Just one last trip," Gabriel muttered to himself, his breath forming a white mist in the frosty air. Each step was slow and labored, his aging legs were weary after a long day. Yet, he refused to stop. To him, the joy of the children was the only light in his otherwise bleak existence. Christmas Eve was meant to be a time of love and reunion, but for Gabriel, it was a reminder of loneliness and painful memories. His younger years had been spent in relentless toil, and now, with his hair turned gray, he found himself utterly alone. His beloved wife had passed away years ago, and his 2 sons had chosen lives far away from him, leaving him in a cramped, chilly apartment. But Gabriel bore no resentment toward life. He continued to do good, hoping that in some small way, he could bring smiles to those less fortunate. As he passed through a narrow alley, a faint sound caught his attention, a child's cry. He stopped, squinting into the darkness. The crying grew louder, trembling with pain and desperation, as if pleading for help. "Is someone there?" Gabriel called out, his hoarse voice cutting through the silence. The only reply was the whistle of the wind against the worn walls. A shiver ran down his spine, but he didn't hesitate. Gabriel stepped into the alley, his shaky legs moving with determination. In the dim glow of the small flashlight he always carried, Gabriel was startled to see a trash bin abandoned in the corner. The crying came from within. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid, and the sight inside wrenched his heart. It was a baby girl, tiny and frail, wrapped haphazardly in a thin cloth. Her skin was pale, her lips a bluish tint, and her eyes remained shut as she fought against the merciless cold. Gabriel couldn't believe what he was seeing. Who could be so cruel as to abandon such a fragile life on a night like this? "My God!" Gabriel whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He quickly removed his tattered cloak, wrapping it around the baby and holding her close. The child let out a faint whimper, her breathing weak, but she was alive. "It's okay, my dear," he said, his voice warm and gentle, as if willing his own heart's warmth into her tiny body. "I won't leave you. We'll get through this together." Gabriel turned and left the alley, shielding the baby from the icy wind. His steps quickened despite the pain stabbing at his back and knees. He knew every second was a battle for the child's survival. Back in his cramped apartment, Gabriel gently placed the baby on his worn-out sofa, where he often sat to repair old toys. He grabbed a dry cloth, carefully wiping the child's icy body, and lit a candle to chase away the darkness in the room. "You'll need a name," Gabriel murmured as he gazed at the tiny face. "You were abandoned in the dark, but you're the only light in my life. I'll call you Stella, my little star." Stella. The name resonated in the small room like a prayer. Gabriel held the baby's hand, his eyes brimming with tears but filled with resolve. He knew his life would never be the same again. The days of loneliness and cold despair would give way to a new journey, one fraught with challenges but imbued with purpose. Outside, the church bell continued to toll, mingling with the howling wind through the crevices of his home. Gabriel sat beside Stella, his gaze fixed on her. In that moment, he knew he was no longer alone. No matter how harsh life could be, Gabriel had found a reason to carry on, a tiny star in the cold Christmas night. Gabriel's first morning with Stella began with a piercing cry. The tiny baby lay in a makeshift crib fashioned from an old wooden crate, her wails filling the air. Gabriel, flustered, wasn't sure what to do. His aged hands trembled as he tried to pick her up, but Stella only cried louder. "All right, little one, don't cry," Gabriel murmured, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "I'll figure something out." His initial clumsiness was just the beginning of many trials. Gabriel didn't know the first thing about caring for a newborn. He was used to solitude, eking out a living through odd delivery jobs and repairing old toys. But now, he had to learn how to change diapers, prepare formula, and soothe a baby, things he'd never done in his life. One morning, Gabriel visited Catherine Rivers's grocery store. Catherine, a middle-aged widow notorious in the neighborhood for her nosiness and sharp tongue, eyed him suspiciously as he purchased baby formula. "Gabriel, don't tell me you've kidnapped a child," Catherine said, leaning across the counter, her voice thick with skepticism. Gabriel snorted, shaking his head. "No. I found her abandoned. She needs someone, and I couldn't leave her." Catherine scoffed, her expression disdainful. "You think you can manage? An old, poor man living in a shabby apartment? You think you're some kind of hero?" "Catherine, this isn't a joke," Gabriel said firmly. "I don't need your approval. I just need the formula." Catherine shrugged, shaking her head. "Suit yourself, but don't blame me when people call the police." The real challenges came at night. Gabriel spent hours trying to rock Stella to sleep, sometimes pacing the room until his legs gave out. On one occasion, when her cries wouldn't cease, he banged his fist on the table in frustration, only to feel a pang of guilt immediately after. "I'm sorry, Stella. I shouldn't have lost my patience like that," Gabriel said, his voice trembling as he soothed the baby with his raspy singing. One evening, as Gabriel fumbled with changing Stella's diaper, there was a knock at the door. Louis Morgan, the landlord, a portly man known for his greed and rudeness, stood there with a frown. He looked past Gabriel and noticed Stella. "Gabriel, don't tell me you've brought a baby here," Louis said gruffly. "I had no other choice," Gabriel replied slowly. Louis crossed his arms and smirked. "You think this is a place to raise a kid? If that baby's crying disturbs the other tenants, I won't hesitate to throw both of you out." Gabriel pressed his lips together, his gaze steady. "I'll try to keep her quiet. But I'm not abandoning her." Louis shrugged, his expression sour as he walked away. "We'll see how long you can last, old man." Gabriel's finances quickly dwindled. The few valuable possessions he had, an old pocket watch from his father and a well-worn repair kit he had used for 20 years, were sold off one by one to buy formula, diapers, and small clothes for Stella. One afternoon, Gabriel brought the pocket watch to Javier Romero's pawnshop. Javier, a young man with a perpetually cold expression, inspected the watch and sneered. "This isn't worth much, old man." "How much can you give me?" Gabriel asked, his voice desperate. Javier glanced at him and shrugged. €50. No more. "But, its value is much higher." Gabriel sighed, pain flashing in his eyes. "Look, if you don't need the money, take it back." "I don't have time for arguments," Javier replied flatly. Gabriel nodded, his hands shaking as he accepted the money. As he left the shop, clutching the bills tightly, his gaze was heavy with despair. The neighbor's suspicion grew by the day. One morning, Gabriel woke to urgent knocking at his door. Standing outside were Rosa Fernandez, a middle-aged woman from the neighborhood, and 2 police officers. "Gabriel, I've heard you brought a baby into your home," Rosa said coldly. "You need to explain yourself to them." One of the officers, a tall man with piercing eyes, spoke firmly. "Mr. Sanders, we've received reports that you're harboring an infant illegally. We need to investigate." Gabriel sighed and brought out Stella, his voice trembling. "This is the child. I didn't kidnap her. I found her abandoned. I'm just trying to save her." The officer glanced at the baby, then turned to Rosa. "Mrs. Fernandez, there's no evidence of kidnapping. If Mr. Sanders intends to care for the child, he'll need to register for guardianship with the authorities." Rosa pursed her lips and walked away without another word. Gabriel watched her leave, his heart heavy. He knew he was walking a difficult path, but as he looked into Stella's innocent eyes, he whispered to himself. No matter what happens, I won't abandon you, Stella. That winter was harsher than any Gabriel had experienced before. His tiny apartment, already cramped, felt like an icebox. Drafts of icy wind seeped through the cracks in the roof, chilling every corner. Gabriel wrapped Stella in 3 layers of blankets, but he himself lacked a warm enough coat. One night, as Gabriel struggled to light the old stove for warmth, a loud knock startled him. Louis Morgan stood outside, his expression grim. Gabriel, you haven't paid this month's rent, Louis said coldly. I can't let you keep owing me. Gabriel turned to look at his empty wallet on the table, fumbling for words. Louis, I need just 1 more week. Only 1. I've been working extra hours to earn enough, but there are so many expenses for Stella. Louis crossed his arms, scowling. You think this is a charity? If you can't pay up, I'll have to kick both of you out. I've already been too lenient. You don't understand, Louis. This baby has no one else but me. Gabriel pleaded. That's not my problem, Louis snapped, walking away with a final warning. You have 3 days, Gabriel. Or else, don't blame me. Every day was a battle against hunger, cold, and exhaustion. Gabriel worked tirelessly from morning to night, taking on grueling jobs like shoveling snow and fixing broken machinery, even though his back ached so much he could barely stand upright. One evening, after finishing an extra shift, Gabriel returned home with a small carton of milk in hand. When he entered the frigid room, he found Stella curled up, her tiny face pale. I'm back, Stella, Gabriel murmured, setting the milk on the table and picking her up. You're cold, aren't you? I'm sorry. I'll find a way. His voice choked as he looked into Stella's innocent eyes, as if she understood all the pain he was enduring. Gabriel's health struggles began to take their toll. One day, while shoveling snow outside a restaurant, he collapsed in the middle of the street, clutching his back in pain. Michael Adams, his only friend, ran to help him up. Gabriel, you can't keep doing this. Michael said, his voice filled with concern. You're overworking yourself. What will happen to Stella if you collapse? Gabriel shook his head, struggling to stand. Michael, I don't have a choice. If I stop, Stella won't have milk or clothes. She needs me. Michael sighed, his eyes full of sympathy. I'll help you. I've got some savings. Please, take it for Stella. Gabriel placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, shaking his head in refusal. Thank you, Michael, but I can't accept. This is my responsibility. The unrelenting hardships forced Gabriel to make even more sacrifices. One morning, he sat at his small table, holding the last piece of stale bread he had. He looked at Stella, who was watching him with curious eyes, her tiny hands gripping a milk bottle. Eat, Stella. I love you so much, Gabriel said gently, his voice tired but affectionate. Stella didn't understand. She happily drank her milk while Gabriel swallowed his hunger, trying to ignore the gnawing ache in his stomach. The neighbors began to notice Gabriel's struggles, though not everyone was kind. One afternoon, as Gabriel hung up Stella's diapers to dry in the yard, Catherine Rivers walked by with a bag of groceries in hand. Gabriel, are you still trying to care for that baby? Catherine asked mockingly. Don't you see you're wasting your strength? Maybe it's time to let the authorities handle it. Gabriel clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. Catherine, the child is innocent. I can't abandon her. Catherine chuckled, shaking her head. You think you're a hero? You're just a pathetic old man trying to do something beyond your ability. Just wait until you collapse, you'll pay the price. The peak of Gabriel's sacrifices came when he had to sell his final keepsake, an old coat that had belonged to his late wife. He held the coat in his hands, stroking its seams as if feeling the warmth of memories long past. Laura, I'm sorry, Gabriel whispered, his eyes brimming with tears. I have no other choice. This child, she needs me more than anything. One night, a snowstorm suddenly swept through the area. The wind howled through the cracks in the doors and windows, and the streetlights outside went dark. Gabriel held Stella close to his chest, trying to share what little warmth he had left. He whispered into her ear, his voice choked with emotion. Stella, you're the only light in my life. No matter what happens, I'll protect you. The room grew silent, save for the sound of the wind and their faint breaths as they fought against the cold and solitude. Gabriel knew the road ahead would be even tougher, but he had no regrets. To him, Stella was everything. In a luxurious hotel suite in the city center, Mary and Carter sat by the window, gazing down at the small street below. Her eyes welled with tears as she spotted Gabriel's frail figure carrying Stella out of the dilapidated apartment, a thin blanket wrapped around the baby to shield her from the winter chill. She clenched her hands, guilt surging through her. That's my daughter, Mary whispered, her voice trembling. I abandoned her. God, what have I done? Mary, a famous singer who once stood at the pinnacle of her career, had fallen into crisis after a scandal the previous year. When she discovered her pregnancy, she kept it secret, fearing public backlash and media scrutiny. Leaving her baby behind was a decision she thought would protect her career, but each passing day, she couldn't forget the eyes of the child she had left. Mary, you can't keep dwelling on this, Lucas Adams, her longtime manager, said as he entered the room. What's done is done. You can't change the past. Mary turned, her red-rimmed eyes meeting Lucas's. But what have I done with my life, Lucas? That's my daughter, and now she's living in poverty with an old man. Lucas shrugged, sitting down in a chair. Gabriel Sanders isn't just anyone. He's a good man, Mary. If it weren't for him, your daughter wouldn't have survived. You can't just show up out of nowhere and expect things to go back to normal. That will only make things worse. But Lucas's words didn't ease Mary's guilt. For weeks, she had secretly followed Gabriel from a distance. Every time she saw him struggling to care for Stella, her heart ached. Once, she watched as Gabriel stood outside Javier Romero's pawnshop, selling his old coat to buy milk for Stella. Mary wanted to rush over, to scream that she would take care of her daughter, but fear and the weight of her past held her back. One afternoon, Mary decided to get closer. Wearing a long coat and a hat that concealed her face, she stood on a street corner. Gabriel was playing with Stella in the park, trying to make her laugh despite his exhaustion and frailty. Mary stood still, tears streaming down her face. She's so beautiful, Mary whispered to herself. Do you know that baby? A female voice suddenly asked from behind her. Mary turned, startled. It was Catherine Rivers, Gabriel's nosy neighbor, eyeing her with suspicion. No, no. I just think she's adorable, Mary stammered, trying to stay calm. Catherine narrowed her eyes, a smirk curling on her lips. You're strange. I've never seen you around here. But let me be blunt, Gabriel can't care for that baby forever. A poor old man like him. Someone will have to step in sooner or later. Mary said nothing, watching Catherine walk away as her heart grew heavier. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection, a beautiful, famous woman, yet hollow on the inside. What should I do, Lucas? Mary asked over the phone with her manager. I can't go on like this. Gabriel can't bear this burden forever. But if I show up, it'll ruin everything. Lucas sighed on the other end. Mary, you need to decide. You can't keep standing on the sidelines, watching. Either you let go completely, or you face your mistakes and try to make amends. The internal conflict continued to torment Mary. One evening, she stood outside Gabriel's small apartment. The dim light from the window illuminated the inside, where she saw Gabriel soothing Stella to sleep, his voice raspy with exhaustion. "You are the greatest gift I've ever received," Gabriel said to Stella, his voice trembling with emotion. "I will do everything to protect you." Mary clutched her chest, feeling as though her heart were breaking. She knew she couldn't keep running from the truth. But stepping in and revealing everything could destroy the life Gabriel had painstakingly built. Mary sat quietly on the curb, her hands trembling. The biting wind swept through, but she didn't feel it. Her thoughts drifted back to her early career, the sold-out performances, the adoration of fans, and the crushing weight of scandal when it struck. At that time, she had chosen fame over her child. "I was wrong," Mary whispered, tears streaming down her face. In the distance, streetlights flickered, casting a faint glow on Gabriel as he emerged from the apartment. He carried a tattered bag in one hand, Stella cradled against his shoulder. Mary stood up, watching him disappear into the night. Soon, Mary whispered to herself, her eyes glistening with determination. "I'll make things right, no matter the cost." The next morning, Gabriel hurriedly carried Stella in his arms to the repair shop where he worked. The cold turned his lips blue, and Stella's cries drew the stares of passers-by. "I have no other choice," Gabriel muttered, quickening his pace. When he entered the shop, Philip Turner, the owner with a thick beard and a stern expression, was waiting for him. Philip crossed his arms, his displeasure evident. "Gabriel, how many times have I told you?" Philip began heavily. "The shop is no place for a baby. Her crying distracts everyone." Gabriel pleaded. "I'm sorry, Philip. But I couldn't find anyone to watch Stella today. She's too young, and I can't leave her alone at home." Philip raised an eyebrow, smirking. "I understand your situation, Gabriel, but this can't keep happening. This is a workplace, not a daycare." Gabriel tried to explain, his voice shaking. "I just need a few more weeks to stabilize things. Please, Philip. I can't lose this job. Without it, I can't take care of Stella." Philip shook his head, his eyes cold. "I've given you enough chances, Gabriel, but you've broken the rules too many times. Today is your last day." Gabriel bit his lip, unable to speak. He bowed his head and carried Stella out, his co-workers whispering among themselves. "Gabriel, I'm so sorry," Henry Roberts, a young mechanic, called after him. "I hope you get back on your feet soon. If you need anything, come find me." Gabriel nodded faintly, his heart heavy. Losing his job meant losing his last glimmer of hope. Gabriel's small apartment now resembled an abandoned ruin. Every corner was covered in dust, the leaky roof let in faint rays of daylight, and icy drafts chilled the nights. Stella's cries echoed through the stillness, but this time, Gabriel lacked the strength to comfort her. He lay on his rickety bed, his eyes closed, his breathing labored. "Gabriel. Are you okay?" Michael Adams appeared, carrying a bag of bread and a bottle of water. Seeing his old friend so frail, Michael quickly set the bag on the table and rushed over. Gabriel barely shook his head, his voice a faint whisper. "Michael, I don't know if I can keep going. Stella, she needs more than I can give." Michael sat beside him, placing a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "You can't give up. Stella needs you. I'll help you figure something out." Yet Michael's help was like a drop of water in a desert. Gabriel's health continued to deteriorate. One morning, as he tried to lift Stella to feed her, he collapsed in the middle of the room. At that moment, Louis Morgan, the landlord, appeared, banging loudly on the door. "Gabriel. I told you, you need to pay this week's rent." Louis shouted, his face livid. Gabriel struggled to stand, leaning on a chair for support. "Louis, I need more time. I just lost my job. Please, give me a few more days." Louis crossed his arms, smirking coldly. "I'm not running a charity. If you don't pay in 3 days, both you and the baby will be out on the street." Don't you understand? She's only a few months old. I can't let her die without shelter. Gabriel's voice cracked, sounding more like a plea than a protest. That's not my problem, Gabriel, Louis replied, turning away and leaving Gabriel slumped in his chair, his eyes red with despair. The following days grew even worse. Gabriel could barely muster the strength to eat or do odd jobs to earn money. His once strong, calloused hands now trembled so much that he couldn't change Stella's diaper without dropping it. Each time the baby cried, he could only whisper, "I'm sorry, Stella. I'm sorry I'm not strong enough. But you have to hold on just a little longer. We'll get through this." Mary silently witnessed it all from a distance. Standing outside Gabriel's small, dim apartment window, she looked through the fogged glass, her hands clenched tightly. Inside, Gabriel sat on the floor, holding an empty milk bottle, his eyes weary. Stella lay curled on a tattered blanket, her faint cries cutting through Mary's heart. "My child," Mary whispered, her voice choking. She wanted to knock on the door, to run inside, but her feet felt glued to the ground. "You won't do anything, will you?" a voice said from behind her. Mary turned to see Catherine Rivers, Gabriel's nosy neighbor, standing there with her arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "You seem awfully interested in Gabriel and that baby. But you're just like him, you won't do anything about it." "What do you mean by that?" Mary asked, her voice sharp. Gabriel's at his wit's end. No money, no job, and a baby that cries all day. I bet he's close to giving up. Or worse, Catherine shrugged coldly. That baby won't survive if this continues. Mary didn't reply. She turned away, tears streaming down her face. Catherine's words felt like a knife stabbing into her heart. That night, Gabriel lay on his bed, feverish and delirious. Stella lay beside him, her tiny hand touching his as if trying to wake him. Gabriel opened his eyes, his vision blurry as he looked at her. "I'm sorry, Stella," he whispered, his voice weak. "I promised to protect you, but I don't know if I can keep going." The door suddenly swung open, and Michael rushed in, his face filled with worry. "Gabriel! You have a fever. I'm taking you to the hospital." "No," Gabriel struggled to sit up, shaking his head. "I can't go. If I leave, who will take care of Stella? You won't be able to do anything if you die." Michael shouted, his voice filled with pain. "Gabriel, think about Stella. She needs you alive, not a fallen hero." The room fell into a heavy silence. Gabriel hung his head, tears streaming down his face. He knew Michael was right, but the despair in his heart wouldn't relent. He had sacrificed everything, yet it felt like the world was against him. "Stella," Gabriel looked toward the crib where the baby was sleeping. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better life." Outside, the cold wind howled through the cracks in the door, like the endless sighs of a winter night. Gabriel closed his eyes, his heart heavy, but he held on tightly to his last hope, Stella. Though exhausted, he knew he couldn't let go. Mary sat on a plush sofa in her luxurious hotel room, the city lights twinkling outside the window. Her hands were clenched so tightly they had turned white. Her heart was a storm of conflicting emotions. The image of Gabriel, exhausted and cradling Stella in his freezing apartment, haunted her. "Mary, you can't keep going on like this," Lucas Adams, her longtime manager, said as he entered the room. He placed a cup of hot tea on the table in front of her, his eyes filled with concern. "What should I do, Lucas?" Mary asked, her voice breaking. "I want to help Gabriel and the baby, but I don't know where to start. If I show up, it will only make things worse." Lucas sat across from her, sighing. "Mary, I know you're scared. But this isn't something you can keep running from. The baby needs you, and Gabriel is running on empty. You have to face this, no matter how hard it is." Still, Mary couldn't make a decision. She spent the entire day wandering aimlessly around the small neighborhood where Gabriel lived. From a distance, she saw him standing at a second-hand shop counter, his calloused hands trembling as he counted his meager coins. "That baby will die if I don't do something," Mary murmured, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yet she couldn't bring herself to step forward. That evening, Mary returned to her hotel room. She stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection, a famous woman filled with guilt. She remembered her dazzling days on stage, the sold-out shows, and the admiring gazes of thousands of fans. But none of it could fill the void inside her. "Marion Carter, you're a selfish person," she said to herself. "You chose fame over your daughter, and now what? You just stand by, too afraid to act." Determined, Mary decided to visit Catherine Rivers, Gabriel's neighbor. Catherine opened the door, raising an eyebrow when she saw Mary standing there. "Oh, it's you again," Catherine said mockingly. "You seem awfully interested in Gabriel and that baby." "I need to know more about their situation," Mary said, trying to stay calm. "I know Gabriel is struggling. Is there any way to help him?" Catherine crossed her arms, smirking. "Who do you think you are to help? Gabriel is too stubborn. He'd rather starve than accept help from anyone. And honestly, don't bother. Neither he nor that baby will last much longer." "You're cruel," Mary replied, her eyes blazing with anger. "He's done everything to protect that baby. And all you do is stand by and judge him." Catherine shrugged and slammed the door, leaving Mary standing there, overwhelmed with frustration. That night, Mary made up her mind to approach Gabriel's door. She stood in the dark, her hand trembling as she prepared to knock. Inside, the faint light spilling through the window revealed Gabriel lying on a small bed, clutching Stella tightly. They looked as though they were battling the cold of the entire world. "Gabriel," Mary whispered, her hand brushing against the old wooden door. But she couldn't bring herself to knock. Fears from her past surged forward, flashes of paparazzi cameras, sensational headlines, the humiliation when the scandal broke. She was terrified her presence would only bring trouble. She stepped back, tears streaming down her face. Mary returned to her hotel and called Lucas. Her voice trembled as she spoke into the phone. "Lucas, I can't keep running anymore. I have to do something, but I'm scared. If I show up, Gabriel might hate me. He might never forgive me." Lucas was silent for a moment before replying. "Mary, I don't think Gabriel is that kind of person. He has a compassionate heart, something you've seen in how he's cared for Stella. If you're honest and truly want to make amends, I believe he'll understand." The next morning, Mary resolved to return. This time, she summoned all the courage she could muster. Standing in front of the wooden door, she heard Stella's faint cries and Gabriel's heavy coughs. She took a deep breath and raised her hand to knock. But before her hand touched the door, she froze. Painful memories flooded back the moment she placed Stella in that dark alley, turned away, and didn't look back. For the first time in her life, Mary felt her heart completely shatter. "What will you do?" Lucas's voice from the phone echoed in her mind. Mary closed her eyes, holding back tears. "This is the moment to face it," she whispered, and her hand finally tapped lightly on the door, a decision that would change everything. Her heart pounded, a storm of fear and guilt surging inside her. The door opened, revealing Gabriel's weary, gaunt face. His eyes were sunken from sleepless nights, and in his arms, Stella was swaddled tightly in an old blanket, her tiny face full of fatigue. Gabriel's expression flickered with surprise at the sight of a stranger, but he said nothing, tilting his head slightly as if asking what she wanted. "Mr. Gabriel, I'm Mary," she began, her voice unsteady. I'm here because of Stella." Gabriel's expression immediately changed. He took a step back, instinctively holding the child closer to him. "What do you mean? What does Stella have to do with you?" he asked, his voice low but filled with caution. Mary bowed her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I am Stella's biological mother. Her words struck like lightning in the cold winter night. Gabriel froze, his arms tightening around the baby. What are you saying? How? His voice faltered, unable to continue. Please, let me explain, Mary pleaded, her tone desperate. I made a terrible mistake. I abandoned her. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't bear to see you go through this alone. Gabriel stared at Mary, his sharp gaze piercing her. You're the one who left her in that trash bin on that freezing night, he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. Mary nodded, tears streaming. Yes, but not because I didn't love her. I was scared, selfish, and weak. I thought doing so would protect my career, but now I realize I lost the most precious thing in my life. Gabriel turned away, his breathing heavy. He looked down at Stella, who was sound asleep in his arms, blissfully unaware of the turmoil around her. Do you know that I've given everything to care for her? I've sacrificed everything, to keep her safe. I know, Mary whispered. And I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. But please, give me a chance to make things right. I want to be Stella's mother, to make it up to her. Gabriel stared directly into Mary's eyes, his gaze filled with pain. Do you think saying a few words of regret can undo what you've done? You have no idea what she's been through, or what I've been through. I know, Mary said through sobs. But I'm willing to do anything to prove I'm sincere. I was wrong, but I want to make amends. Please, Mr. Gabriel. Gabriel sighed deeply and gently placed Stella on the small bed. Turning back to Mary, his voice was calm but laden with emotion. Do you know why I don't hate you? Because I see myself in you. I've made mistakes in my life, too. What matters isn't the mistake but how we fix it. Mary choked back her tears, looking at Gabriel with hope. Then, can you forgive me? Gabriel stepped closer, his trembling hand resting on her shoulder. Forgiveness isn't the issue. What I need to know is whether you're truly willing to be Stella's mother. If you are sincere, you'll prove it with your actions, not your words. Mary nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I'll do everything. I promise. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, as if waging an internal battle. Finally, he nodded slightly. All right. If you're genuine, I'll give you a chance. But remember, that little girl means everything to me. If you hurt her again, I'll never forgive you. Mary bowed her head, tears streaming down. Thank you, Gabriel. I won't let you down. Gabriel turned back to the bed, looking at Stella, who was peacefully sleeping. She deserves a mother. I just hope you'll love her more than anything. Mary walked over to the bed and looked down at the little girl she had abandoned. She leaned down and gently kissed Stella's forehead. My love, I'm sorry. I promise I will never leave you again. Gabriel stood silently, his heart heavy. Yet, in Mary's eyes, he saw a glimmer of hope that perhaps Stella's life could now turn for the better. Mary carefully picked Stella up, feeling the baby's soft breaths and steady heartbeat against her chest. It was the first time she had held her daughter for so long. The sensation was both unfamiliar and sacred, causing tears to stream down her face. Gabriel sat in the corner of the room, observing her every move. With a sigh, he spoke slowly. Carrying a baby isn't difficult, but it's not easy either. The child needs to feel secure in your arms. Don't be afraid. Let me show you. Mary turned to Gabriel, her face filled with gratitude. Can you teach me? I really want to learn how to care for her. Gabriel smiled, his eyes softening. Of course. But you need patience. Caring for a child isn't just about responsibility, it's about love. Each morning, Mary practiced changing Stella's diaper. Gabriel patiently sat beside her, guiding her step by step, how to support the baby's head, how to clean the delicate skin, and how to wrap the diaper snugly but comfortably. Whenever she made a mistake, Mary would fumble nervously, but Gabriel would only smile. "It's all right. You'll get the hang of it." I once spent hours learning how to change her diaper myself. Alongside learning to care for Stella, Mary began sharing simple meals with Gabriel. She learned to cook porridge and soup for Stella under his guidance, finding joy in watching her daughter eat with gusto. These small moments brought them closer, gradually dissolving the initial awkwardness and distance. Mary knew that to care for Stella properly, she had to completely transform her life. The glamour of being a famous singer, the dazzling dresses, the extravagant parties, all of it now seemed insignificant. She spent time reflecting seriously and decided to step away from the entertainment industry temporarily. Lucas, her longtime manager, was taken aback by her decision. "Mary, are you sure? You're at the peak of your career. If you leave now, you might never get it back." Mary shook her head, her gaze resolute. "Lucas, I've sacrificed too much for this fame. But now, I realize that nothing is more important than my daughter and family. I need to take the time to make up for my mistakes." Lucas sighed but eventually nodded in agreement. "If that's what you want, I'll support you. But remember, being a mother isn't easy." One evening, Mary sat by Stella's bed as candlelight flickered softly in the small room. She turned to Gabriel, who was busy repairing an old toy car he had found at a thrift shop. "Gabriel," Mary began, her voice gentle but full of emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just save my daughter, you gave me a second chance at life." Gabriel set the toy car down and turned to look at her. "There's no need to thank me. I just did what I thought was right. But the important thing is that you make the most of this chance to become a good mother." Mary nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "I want to do more than that. I want you to know that, you're not just someone who saved Stella. To me, you're like a father. I want you to be my adoptive father and Stella's grandfather." Gabriel stared at her, momentarily stunned. Then, a soft smile spread across his face. "Are you sure? I'm just an old man with nothing to offer but love." "That's exactly why you deserve it more than anyone," Mary replied. "Family isn't about blood, it's about love. And you've given me and Stella more love than we could ever ask for." Gabriel nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "All right. I'll be your adoptive father. And I promise to love both you and Stella as my own family." As time passed, Mary realized that the simple life with Gabriel and Stella brought her true happiness. Days spent caring for her daughter, feeding her, putting her to sleep taught her the meaning of unconditional love. At night, she often sang lullabies she had written just for Stella, her voice warm and full of affection. One morning, Mary carried Stella to the park. Gabriel sat on a nearby bench, sunlight warming his silver hair. Mary watched her daughter giggle in her arms, then turned to Gabriel. "Mr. Gabriel, I never thought I could be this happy. I used to believe that fame and the spotlight were everything, but now I know there's nothing more precious than family." Gabriel smiled and placed a hand on Mary's shoulder. "That's a lesson not everyone gets the chance to learn. Sometimes, losing the glitter of life helps us realize what truly matters." Mary nodded, gazing at the clear blue sky. "I used to fear that I couldn't make up for my mistakes. But thanks to you, and thanks to Stella, I know I can." Sensing her mother's love, Stella beamed and reached out toward Gabriel. He laughed and lifted the little girl into his arms, his old hands radiating warmth. The three of them sat together, a family spanning 3 generations, united by love and hope. The wounds of the past and the pain they endured slowly faded, replaced by the light of reunion and forgiveness. Mary knew that from this moment on, she had found the most precious thing in her life. Mary decided to bring Gabriel and Stella to live with her. She prepared everything, from a cozy room for Gabriel to a charming, toy-filled nursery just for Stella. When the taxi stopped in front of the house, Mary stepped out, her face glowing with a radiant smile. Gabriel held Stella in his arms, his expression a mix of confusion and emotion. He gazed at the spacious, clean house with its bright flowers lining the entrance, unable to hide his awkwardness. "Miss Mary, I don't know what to say," Gabriel hesitated. Mary stepped closer, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Gabriel, you and Stella are my family. This is your home too. Let me make up for all the hardships you both have endured." Gabriel bowed his head, too overwhelmed to speak. He looked down at Stella, peacefully asleep in his arms, and nodded softly. From the very first day, Mary worked to transform their lives, ensuring Gabriel and Stella received the best care possible. She personally prepared nutritious meals, choosing dishes that Gabriel enjoyed. Simple fare like potato soup, stews, or toasted bread with jam became luxurious treats Gabriel never thought he'd experience. "Mary, you don't have to go through so much trouble," Gabriel said during a meal, his voice filled with gratitude. Mary smiled warmly. "You gave everything to protect Stella. This is how I show my gratitude. Please, let me take care of you and her, Gabriel." In the evenings, Mary often sat on the plush sofa with Stella in her arms while Gabriel recounted stories from his past. His voice, deep and sometimes tinged with humor, made Stella giggle, her tiny hands waving in the air as if trying to catch the stories themselves. One afternoon, after putting Stella to sleep in her crib, Mary joined Gabriel on the porch. They sat quietly, watching the golden rays of the setting sun stretch across the lush green lawn. Gabriel held a cup of hot tea, his hands still calloused and trembling from years of hardship. "Gabriel, you've changed my life," Mary began, her voice breaking with emotion. "If it weren't for you, I would have lost the chance to be a mother. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't found Stella." Gabriel turned to look at Mary, his eyes filled with understanding. "Miss Mary, I don't think I did anything special. I only did what anyone would do when they see a child in need. But I'm glad you decided to come back and be Stella's mother." "No, Gabriel," Mary said, tears streaming down her face. "Not everyone has a heart like yours. You loved and protected her when I couldn't face myself. You gave me a second chance, and I'll forever be grateful." Gabriel remained silent, staring into his cup of tea. He wasn't used to receiving praise, but a warm feeling blossomed in his chest. He nodded slightly, offering a gentle smile. Mary gradually adapted to her new life. Gone were the extravagant parties and packed schedules of a celebrity. Instead, she spent her days taking Stella to the park, tending to the small garden in the backyard with Gabriel, and occasionally joining him in browsing thrift shops where he often found joy in simple things. As the days passed, Mary, Gabriel, and Stella became a true family. Mary began calling Gabriel father, and Stella started calling him grandpa. The first time Stella said grandpa, Gabriel was so moved that tears rolled down his cheeks. "She called me grandpa," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Miss Mary, I never thought I'd have a family like this." Mary smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We are a family, Gabriel. And I'll do everything I can to keep this family happy." Evenings were spent together as a family. Mary often sang gentle lullabies, Gabriel shared stories of his impoverished childhood, and Stella's innocent laughter lit up the room, bringing smiles to both adults. One day, Mary stood in the living room, watching Gabriel and Stella play together. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, creating a warm and serene scene. She couldn't hold back her emotions as tears welled up, realizing that this was the happiness she had been searching for. "My love, I found the most precious thing in my life," Mary whispered, her eyes brimming with love as she watched Stella. "Not fame, not the spotlight. But love, family, and the simple joys of life." Mary walked over and sat down beside Gabriel. He looked at her with kind eyes. Mary took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Father, thank you for saving my daughter and for giving me another chance to be a mother." Gabriel smiled, his eyes glistening with pride. "Miss Mary, you're the one who made this happen. You've changed, and you've done better than anyone could have hoped for." The story reminds us that the power of love and forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds, no matter how painful the past. Mary learned that fame and glittering success could never replace the value of family. Gabriel, despite enduring countless hardships, chose compassion to save a fragile life. Through their sacrifices and shared journey, we see that family is not solely defined by blood but by unconditional love and forgiveness.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.